Test, test, test. Good morning, everybody. Today the plan is to finish the calligraphy mock-up that I've been working on, and then maybe pull my computer out of the way and start cutting on and marking up my new sheet of vellum so I can begin the actual project. My setup is a little bit different this morning. Hopefully I don't have too many things in the way of themselves and I'll be able to see what I'm doing. Just adjusting a few sound settings here. I admit I don't expect to get a whole lot of traffic today. There we are. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I just have a little bit left to do on this. I have the remains of a short poem here, followed by the Oath of Chivalry, followed by another miniature. I think I should pull that over here now while I can. The other miniature looks like this. It shows our fellow being given the accolade by the king, while some people look on and musicians play in the background. This is a modified miniature from the manuscript. The tents were part of the manuscript, the musicians. This overall scene with the figures, though, has been largely composited from several different other images. You know, the king was there. Somebody kneeling may have been in there, but I don't recall. Onlookers were definitely there. I like the way this gentleman here has his hand on one of the tent ropes, or on the side of the tent, depending on how you look at it, right in here. It just is a neat little image to me, and I'm kind of proud of it. But we'll get these out of the way, and we'll start scribing and just finishing up here. I have one line left in this column, and then I'll be ready to move to my final column, which is where the Oath of Chivalry, the miniature, and then the done on this day by so-and-so, so-and-so is going to go. So let's get started. As I recall, I was scribing along happily last week when my laptop decided to power off. I was not very thrilled with that, and I'm sure none of you were either. Someone was asking about my scribing upside down, as I recall. It's a left-handed trick. Not every left-hander uses it, but I appreciate it. It works quite well for me. It's interesting to me that my original attempt at this from last year seems to be shy, just one line or two lines in each column, because I seem to have more room this year than I did then, and I'm not quite sure how that happened because I measured everything exactly the same. My columns are relatively narrow, 4 inches by 9 inches. So that's the end of that poem, where last year, if we look at it very carefully here, I actually had those last 2 lines up here on my final column, and here I do not. It's a little strange. Also, last year I did something a little differently. If we look at this right side up, bring it over here. My capital letter begins the title, The Oath of Chivalry. And then I skipped using the capital for I here swear fealty. And this is a little unusual. If you look elsewhere, both on this page and in the manuscript, they didn't do that. They didn't highlight their titles with a fancy capital. They highlighted the beginning of a paragraph with a fancy capital. So technically, this shouldn't be a T, it should be an I. So I'm going to attempt it today slightly differently. Go ahead and bring my column over here. Hopefully that's on camera for everybody and you can see well. Ordinarily this would be in red ink since it's a title. Since today is just about practice, I'm less concerned about that. Break out my pencil. I find the capital I in this particular manuscript to be especially interesting because if you look here, it's really asymmetrical. The reason they didn't center it was so they could put a little bit of drawing off in this empty space here and decorate it a little bit. Maybe come up here and have a leaf, or down here and have something like that. But then in here, most often, they put a face. Someone wearing a cowl or a wimple, perhaps. Maybe there'd be hair, you never know. But they had faces a lot, and I thought that was really interesting. So that is I. I here swear fealty. Anybody who's a knight recognizes these arms and has them memorized. Anybody who's not a knight is probably pretty familiar with them too if you're in the SCA. So I am recording this live stream in the event that anybody wants to watch it later. But at the moment, my statistics say that I don't have anybody watching. So I'm not going to do a whole lot of talking here for a little bit. And if you are watching the recording and it seems especially quiet to you, that's why. Hopefully the nature sounds in the background are soothing and not boring. But this will let me concentrate a little bit. If anybody does stop in, I hope that you'll say hello. I haven't done any warm-up exercises this morning, which I probably ought to have done. And I'm gripping the pen a little bit on the tight side. Can't seem to make myself loosen up right now. I'll either loosen up or I'll cut the session short. Wouldn't want that to happen. I'm going to have to revisit that capital S there. I'm not sure if that's how I like it. Not sure if that's what they did, or if it was more like that. That looks a little weird. They both look a little weird. I'll have to decide later. It's interesting to me, excuse me, it's interesting to me how even with a lettering guide, all these letters evenly spaced, all these lines evenly spaced, my letters are still not necessarily as consistent as they could be. I sometimes will go just a little outside the lines and sometimes a little inside the lines, and next thing you know, I have bigger and smaller letters. I find that interesting. When I stick to the constraints that are actually set here, these are some really tiny letters. Less than 1/8 of an inch tall, I know that. Oh, did I see somebody stop in briefly? I don't know if you're still here. Feel free to say hello if you are. Now, I may have to revisit that capital letter S. But the capital letter F is a really interesting one. I enjoy it quite a bit from this manuscript. It looks a little bit like a P. I promise it's enough. I didn't do this the last time I wrote this out on a real project. For those of you who haven't been playing along at home, I started this scroll in 2019 and then went through a house fire in January of 2020, such that it was destroyed. I've had an adventurous year, and now it's finally time to start over. But one thing I didn't do, see these empty gaps at the end of each line. I left them as they were because I didn't realize that in the manuscript there are places where they did have line fillers, decorative blue and gold accents that filled in the space and made the column look square rather than shortened. I see somebody else has popped in. Hello? I'm almost done with my calligraphy mock-up. And if there's time today and if there's interest, one of the things that I might do is take all this pink fabric that's here in the background, pull that out of the way, and show you the sheet of vellum I'm going to be working on. And maybe start marking that up, all the margins and pencil lines and things that I'm going to need. It's not pretty work, admittedly. And a lot of it is invisible on the finished piece, but without it, things don't look nearly as good as they ought. Thus swear I. The last words of the Knight's Oath. Of the SCA. I have no idea what the Knight's Oath might be in other countries. But in the little game that we play, there's an oath that knights swear. Some of them uphold it better than others. So that's the Knight's Oath. And then I have some spacing issues to worry about here. Just as I did over in this column, this big empty space that you see. We're going to lay that down very carefully. Mark where it goes. This is a whole lot of pencil lines that I'll eventually have to erase. But that can wait. For now, let's get this laid out. See if it's an even number of lines or not. I like to make sure that my lines aren't offset from one another in these two columns, since they'll be the same page, as it were. The whole scroll is one page, but it's designed to look like two. So I have one here and one here. Moving that out of the way, we'll come back here, put this miniature in place, count the lines. As I said before, feel free to say hello. I think I have one viewer right now, and you're the only one keeping me company. You're the only one I'm talking to. "27 lines for this miniature. And we'll start right there on 28 with actual text. That's good. Just pre-marking those other lines so I know where my pen is supposed to go. And I'll slide this up so you can all see it a little bit better. Oh, somebody did say hello. It's Sara Sampson. Hello, Sara. Very pleased to see you here. I hope I'm not boring you. You're stuck around, so I mean, that's promising. Now, here's a question. I have 3 lines of text left here. Given this 10th day of September, Anno Societatis 51, in testimony whereof we here set hand and seal. And then there's room for signatures and seal. It's very nice. I didn't put a capital here. It's tempting, very tempting, to make a nice big capital again and put a G here and swirl it down and decorate it. You know what? I have space. I think I'm going to do that. So I need my pencil again. Just a little capital this time, I think, rather than a huge one. Tempting though it may be. Actually, yeah, I probably shouldn't go much bigger than that. There are only 3 lines of text here. Maybe if I make a 3-line capital instead of a 2-line capital. So about that big. You see the difference that's going to make. There's a nice, lovely letter G. That's a fun letter. I'll probably have to dig through the manuscript and see if I can find a G to copy. But all that aside, given as far as I know, my head isn't blocking the view. If it is, let me know. If you have any questions, Sarah, I am perfectly happy to answer them. I don't get audible pings when you send a message, so I may not answer right away. And also there's a few seconds delay between what I see on my screen and what you see on my screen. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. 10th day of September. Societatis 51. That was a few years ago now. It's like a 3-line capital. It's going to be the perfect size. That's reassuring. So one thing I plan to do after this text is finished, since the whole purpose of this was to check that A, I still know how to make the letters, B, I can make them consistently, and C, I'll have enough space. This is my final mock-up. I've done a couple of these already that I didn't live stream. And one of the things that I want to do is start marking up the vellum today. And that's something I'm actually pretty excited to do. And it'll be roughly as interesting as watching me do calligraphy practice, which is to say, not that interesting. But it's an important step, and the whole purpose of this live stream for me is to have people keep me company while I work, but also to show you the full process that goes into making an award scroll, including the bits that aren't shiny and aren't glittery and aren't colorful. But are nevertheless important. Oh, that's lovely. Having that 3-line capital. It's really going to space this nicely. I'm digging it. Nice. Plenty of room at the bottom, room for signatures, room for a seal. It's gonna look snazzy. I don't know if Cameron and Amelie themselves will ever have time to sign this. Hopefully they do. But that'll be the responsibility of the recipient, my client, to get taken care of. Or alternately, I'll ship this to the Kingdom Signet, who is the officer in charge of such things, and she can either track down Cameron and Amelie and get their signatures. She will be able to put a seal on it, so make it all official. That'll be nice. But yeah, right side up. That's a lot of text. That is a lot of text. So big honkin' miniature. This is 2 columns worth of text. And then this is the second page with 2 more columns of text. But I'm really pleased with how that looks. So what I'm going to do is take a short break here, move my computer out of the way, move some of my gear, get my glasses back on, and prepare to start marking up vellum. So if you want to see that, great. If you don't want to see that, I understand. Let me put my glasses back on since you just sent me another message. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you think that's very nice. But yeah, like I said, I'm just going to take maybe a 2-minute break. So if you want to go grab yourself a drink or something like that, feel free. This is just, I need to clear space. So I will be right back. Oh, lovely. So we're back. If you can see me on the laptop, you can see me futzing around with my camera phone, which decided to cut out. Hopefully you can hear me just fine without it blasting. I just noticed that my microphone was being a bit louder than it needed to be. Some technical issues, no big deal. Anyway, what you're looking at right now is a big blank pink expanse, and that is because I have a sheet of vellum under here that shipped rolled up in a tube. And I needed to let it relax. Putting weight on vellum is actually not the right way to do that, I learned. What we do instead is just let it relax with something on it that will encourage it without squashing it, because you can put a lot of weight on vellum and instead of getting what you want, it will just cockle. It'll buckle, it'll wrinkle, and it's the opposite of what you want. This is a fantastic, gorgeous sheet of vellum. I am so excited about it. It is right now right side up. And as you can see, I had forgotten I'd done this, honestly. Several weeks ago, I already marked out my margins and my columns. I have all kinds of illustrations that are going to fit under here. I don't know if you can see any of this because I have my camera zoomed in a little bit far. Let me zoom out if I can. There we are. Hopefully you can see some of what I'm doing here. There's the bottom of it. Those are my bottom margins. Actually, they're backwards. I've got my dancers over here celebrating. And over here, two separate images of a young boy practicing against a knight. And then over here, two young squires practicing together. And these are the arms of the recipient. And then over here, our gentlemen will have been knighted, and they're all celebrating. And we have guys wearing masks and women not wearing masks, and they're dancing along, and it's great. Here's another illustration that I have. This is the big one. Let's see if I can get that in the camera for you. And then my other one's a gentleman fighting for his lady's honor is going to go roughly there. And then actually receiving the accolade and being knighted is going to go roughly there. And all this other space is going to be filled with text. Honestly, it's kind of ridiculous. But I have my columns laid out. The next thing that I need to do is mark up my text spaces here and here. And that's going to take a while. I had planned to mark my columns and my margins today, forgetting that I had already done so. But one thing I can do, this sheet is supposed to be 18 inches by 26 inches, and it shipped oversized by a lot. So what I can do is pull out my cutting board and my cutter, cut this down to its proper size, and pray that I don't make any obvious mistakes. So let's just move this out of the way. Oh, what a beautiful, beautiful sheet of vellum. There are people who make vellum according to period methods, and there are people who make vellum according to modern methods, which gets it a little bit drier, a little bit easier to work. And that was what I went with here. Specifically, I went with a supplier that provides vellum and parchment for Jewish religious purposes. Torah scrolls, mezuzah, and tefillim. I'm probably saying those wrong because I myself am not Jewish and there's so little that I know about the faith, including how to pronounce any of it. But we shipped huge. They were very, very generous, and I was very, very grateful. But it did mean that I have some cutting down to do to make sure that everything comes to size. And if you look at this, I don't know how well you can see it, but my edge was not quite straight either. Let's see if I can get this on camera. And so I'm just going to lay this out on my cutting board. And if you haven't noticed, I'm wearing gloves. These are simple. You get these at the pharmacy for $5 or $6 a pair, sometimes $5 for 2 pairs. They're meant for dermatology, like if you put medication on your skin, then you put the gloves on and it keeps the medication where it belongs. For our purposes, though, these are just simple cotton gloves, and they keep you from getting skin oils on the vellum. Vellum being made of animal skin, it will absorb skin oils, and then those skin oils will resist any ink or any paint that you might be trying to put on the page. And it is super annoying, honestly. So we wear gloves. I can do many things. Cutting a straight line is not always one of them. So I'm going super slow, super careful, with a super sharp rotary cutter. So far it's going well, but I don't trust myself not to make a mistake. Luckily I have 1.5 inches of what I call framing margins. There we go. And these scraps are very valuable. These are terrific for practicing your gilding on, testing your paints on. I'm not going to pitch these. As vellum goes, and I paid really a surprisingly small amount for this page, but as vellum goes, this is not cheap stuff. And keeping the scraps, keeping them handy is really great. If you look here, I actually tested some ink on this at one point. Waiting for my camera to catch up here. There we go, you can see that. As I said, there's a delay between what I say and then what you actually see on YouTube. It's annoying, is what it is. Twitch doesn't have that problem, but we're not on Twitch. So now we will cut the other side slowly. Ironic, given that I'm left-handed. I say it's all in the wrist. At the moment, I find it's all in the elbow. I still can't quite cut a straight line to save my life. Go back down here. There we are. Another cut. Just very, very carefully here. There we are. Is that most of it? That's close enough. The important thing are these inner lines. This is going to go under a mat and be framed and disappear, so it's okay if these edges are a little crooked. This has to be wonderfully straight, and it is, because I bought myself a carpenter square, and I used it to make sure my corners were at a nice straight, perfect 90-degree angle. Like all of them, same thing. So the bottom margin is nearly straight. I'm not going to bother cutting that. But the top margin is nearly 1 inch to 3/4 inch too wide, so I'll be cutting that also. This takes up so much space. 26 inches. This is physically the largest scroll that I've ever worked on. It's kind of ridiculous. My client said he wanted something really special to mark what was for him a momentous occasion. And he said 18 by 24 at the smallest. And I could have just taken and written really big, but I didn't. Instead, I decided to write really small and just fill the space with lots and lots and lots of text. I really shouldn't have done that. But his request was also for numerous illustrations. Hey, I see we have 2 people watching now. Feel free to say hello. I have my glasses on right now, so I'll be able to see your messages. That's always nice. Look at that. Lovely, lovely vellum scraps. And these would have been put to use in period as well. They might have been used in bookbinding, or they might have been boiled down and used to make glue. There were a number of possibilities. The sheet is now upside down. My narrow margin is up top. My wide margin is at the bottom. And this will be how I write everything. I'm trying to decide if I want to bother marking lines for the top of these 2 columns, knowing that I'm going to be erasing them all to put this miniature in place. And I think what's going to happen is that I'm just going to mark this down here, rather than fill up all that space that I'm going to have to erase again later. Over here on the other columns, I'm not going to have that luxury. I'm pretty much going to have to mark everything because I have text both above and below my miniatures there. For now, let's bring this over here and over here. Mark there very carefully. Really good vellum you can get to lay almost perfectly flat. This still has a slight wave to it, but it's by far the best sheet that I've ever worked on. I'm really excited about it. Things that nerds get excited about, number 347. Nice smooth vellum. I suppose now is as good a time as any to demonstrate the Ames lettering guide. You need a ruler, which I have. You need a pencil, which I have. And you need this wonderful tool right here. This is called an Ames lettering guide, or sometimes an Alvin lettering guide. They are made in Ames, Iowa. This is a drafting tool. It's got lots and lots of little holes to put your pencil in. That's what it's for. The wheel rotates. It has a scale down here at the bottom and a guide mark on the outside of the wheel. You line up your numbers on this gauge with that bottom mark, and you can adjust these lines accordingly. So for example, perfectly horizontal, there's no difference in width. Completely perpendicular is going to be its widest width. I usually for scrolls operate around an 8 or a 7. For this particular scroll, I'm actually operating at a 6, which is quite narrow. Narrowest I usually go. Actually narrower than I usually go, because like I said, I usually work with an 8 or a 7. For large pieces, I'll sometimes do a 9. But I will put my pencil in each of these holes, and I will just run this back and forth along my ruler, which I make sure is in a straight line. And that is how I make my guidelines. Do you have any questions so far? Is there anything you want to say? I can see that one person is still watching. I kind of hope that it's Sara. And if it's not Sara, that's fine. It would be nice to know that you were with me this whole time. All right, what's one more thing I want to do? I want to make sure I've measured evenly from the bottom of my column. 14 inches. Time to take off my glasses again. 10, okay, 9 7/8, right? 14 inches. 9 7/8. 14 inches. Come on. 9 7/8. Yeah, see the difference here is pretty significant. I had something a little crooked. It's good that I double check these things. You have not watched anyone work with real vellum before, so this is great. Well, thank you. Honestly, I'm glad that you're excited. If you have ever worked with PERG before, it's honestly pretty similar. It's going to be sensitive to skin oils, which is why I'm wearing the gloves. Later on, I'm going to take a pair of scissors and cut some fingertips off of my gloves so that I can feel the pen and not have it slip around. Also, these are a little bit big for my fingers. But it's sensitive to skin oils. It's sensitive to changes in temperature and humidity. So you don't want to paint too wet or it'll buckle. You don't want to put too much gilding adhesive on at once or it'll buckle. But I find for myself that vellum is more forgiving than PERG. I don't actually like to work with PERG because PERG just buckles if you look at it funny. I know a lot of people swear by it. It's less expensive than vellum. It has the look of vellum. It has similar behaviors to vellum, but given the choice, I would work with something else. I would work with the real thing, frankly, because I can, and it's awesome. 14 inches there. 9 7/8 there. Now, why is it? I must have cut that paper crooked. That must be what happened. Off my glasses go. In period, scribes wrote on a slope. My camera setup right now is on a flat table. But in any case, there's absolutely no way on earth that I personally would be able to mark these lines if my table were on a slope. There we are. So my miniature is going to go above that. And then I'll be marking all this text. Ordinarily with vellum, you're going to want a lighter pencil. And I used to have one. I don't anymore. You may have heard me mention that house fire. Yeah. Stuff happens. But to use your lettering guide, you make sure it's set at the right gauge number. And you set this middle row of holes. You set the bottom one on your guideline. Oh, this is going to be great to work with. I've had vellum that was very wavy before. Did not want to cooperate and made it especially difficult to put guidelines on. But I can already tell as smooth as this is going to be lovely. Almost perfectly flat. And then you check it by putting your pencil in that bottom guideline, just dragging it across along your ruler here. Yeah. There's a cockle right there. Is that a cockle? No, there's a bump. What have I got on my cutting board underneath here? I don't know, but it better be gone now. Let's double check this again. One there. One there. Much better. That's what I'm talking about. And once you've tested it like that, then you just go through and mark away. I'm going to go slow and careful because, again, vellum can get wavy. And also this ruler is not the thickest, which means there's a tendency sometimes for my guide to bump down and slide across the ruler, and that will make for crooked lines. Not the end of the world, but it is an inconvenience. Oh, this is beautiful. This is my first time working with this particular vellum supplier. But I'd heard very good things both about their quality and their price. Ah, gorgeous. I'll do it again over here. Back in the day, before people used software for all this stuff, this was an architectural tool, a drafting tool for marking out plans and blueprints. You could measure things very precisely with it. Ah, see what I mean about the guide slipping a little bit? So that's what happens. It slides and you get a crooked line. Not the end of the world. It's just an inconvenience. Anyway, once you've got your first set of lines done, you slide your ruler and your guide up. Place your next set of guidelines. One over there. One over there. Test them. Yep, good. And this is how a lettering guide works. On paper, I go much faster. I recognize that this is just about as exciting as watching paint dry. But as I mentioned before, this structural stuff is like the foundation under your work. And just like the foundation of a house, you may not see it, but if there's anything wrong with it, your house won't stand. After I'm done marking these columns, I want to go back and count that I have 21 lines. That's important. I'm pretty sure that I will have 21 lines. Just looking at the spacing of it, I might even have more. But I only need 21 lines. Without that, my spacing all through these columns gets very weird. Do you have any other questions so far? Really hope this is at least interesting to watch. If not, as satisfying as watching gilding or painting. Gilding and painting are the sexy parts. Let's be real here. Ah, my head is under my camera. Sorry about that. But as I get closer and closer to the end of these columns, I need to see what I'm doing. And as I've mentioned, I'm horrendously nearsighted. Okay, good. See how there's just the slightest buckle right there? That's typical of vellum. But again, this particular vellum is really good. I've worked with vellum that was so wavy that it was impossible to use the lettering guide just about. That is one downside of vellum, is that because it's wavy, the lettering guide doesn't always behave. So close. The edge of my vellum is right at the edge of my table. And also, I have kind of a large chest. Sorry about that. TMI. What it means is there's only so far I can get forward here, which is why my head ends up under my camera. Okay. You make very slight adjustments when you're working with a lettering guide. Less than a millimeter. You know, the thickness of your pencil line can make a difference in the size of your letters. You don't ordinarily think of lines as having much width, especially at the scale, but they definitely do. And this is interesting. If my eyes aren't playing tricks on me, this is slightly narrower and this is slightly wider. Which is another thing that happens when you work with lettering guides, because minute discrepancies in what you're doing add up. So even if this is a perfect 90-degree angle, these lines won't necessarily line up correctly. And the thing to do when that happens is to follow your lettering guidelines. Even though this ends up slightly crooked, from a distance, no one's going to be able to tell the difference. And also, this is what makes your lettering consistent. You don't want to bop down and borrow this line instead, or you'll get a crooked line. There we are. The other thing I could do, if I were feeling sensible, is rotate my page so that I wasn't having to reach so far to get the bottom of this column. But I'm not really feeling sensible today. I'm feeling expedient. That should be about right. That looks good all the way across. And sure enough, there's just ever so slight a discrepancy here. It's not horrible, but it is visible. But there, that's my first two columns laid out. Helpful that I only had to lay out about half of the space. So now we get to do the boring bit, which is count lines. I want to make sure I have 21 lines of text here, and no more than that. If I do have more than that, I'll just move my start down a bit. I want that to be my bottom. On my mock-up, that wasn't my bottom line. This was my bottom line. So 1, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, 21, technically 22, but I wouldn't want to write here anyway because this is the bottom of my miniature and the letters would bump right into it. I don't have any room here for ascenders. What I should do is start on this line instead of this line. But then I would have 22 lines. So what I think I'm going to do is bump my miniature down and start there instead. So let's get my miniature out. It's getting a little beat up. We are. It'll start like that. And this has been cut. It's a little narrow. It should be 2 lines wide. And this is 2 lines wide from what I could see. So that'll be fine. Excuse me. I had lunch right before I started this live stream. And I'm really hoping that the microphone isn't picking up my constant Italian food little burps. Things you say when there's nobody in the room. There's one other thing I'm going to do here. I'm going to rotate this page. You may have noticed in my mock-up that there was a gap between my first letter and then a gap, and then the rest of the line of text. I'm going to go ahead and mark that gap now. Here we are. We'll test this. Close enough. And there's that first gap. What this is just wide enough for a capital letter to start the line, and then the gap, and then the rest of the line. This was something that was on the manuscript. It was originally a giganimous poem, and they started every line of the poem with a capital letter that was then gapped away from, that's what I thought, away from the rest of the text. It's just a convention that they did that they thought looked nice. And it does look nice. So I'm going to do it. There we are. 2 columns of text ready to write. Almost. I need to make space for a capital letter here, a big one. 8 lines high. But that can wait. For now, I'm going to rotate the page again, back to where it was. Slide my cutting board a bit. And I'm going to line out these 2 columns, which is, honestly, I don't know if it gets much more boring than this. But that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to call today's podcast, or podcast, live stream. I don't know why I keep saying podcast. Good. Whoop. There's a little bit of buckle over here on the side. To be expected, again, working with vellum. I don't know if you can see that. Does mean I have to go extra cautiously over here. In period, of course, vellum was used to make books. And I mentioned that it's very responsive to temperature and humidity changes. You can imagine what a whole stack of vellum pages expanding and contracting would be like in, say, damp weather or a foggy day or even just winter versus summer. Books didn't like to stay shut, which is why so many covers had clasps on them. That's pretty close. Let's test that. Ooh. But that's way too low. It's also a smidge too low. There you go. The main problem with this buckle right here is that I keep pressing too hard and then breaking my pencil lead. Not a disaster, just an inconvenience. As with many things to do with art, very few disasters. quite a lot of inconveniences. There we go. I don't know. I think the column is picking up over here. I'm going to check real quick on my stream. Can you see right over here? Looks like you can, just barely. You may be able to see that I've got some dark lines and light lines here. And that's a side effect of having that buckle here in the vellum, this part that sticks up a little bit. It's just a wave. It's a ripple in the vellum. Perfectly normal. Does cause some issues when you're trying to make nice, smooth, straight lines. But I'll be past it soon enough. And when I am, everything will be hunky-dory again. In through here, lovely and smooth and flat. Gorgeous. There's just a little bit of a buckle right here, and I'm almost past it. That's too high. There we go. That's about right. Let's do the difficult side first. And over here on the easy side, gorgeous. Really liking how that's coming out. Honestly, there's not much else that I'm going to be doing with my live stream today. So I'm actually going to go ahead and wrap it up here. It's been great having people keep me company. If you have any questions, feel free to leave comments, in the video that's going to come after this. But thank you very much for watching.